90, no, it can't be 90. It's not 90 yet. So you get some really hot readings. Well, you're in the sun and it feels like it. So that's why we got a bimini on the boat. Get out of the sun. So God's still caring for his prophet. Jonah was happy because the gourd grew up. And then God prepares a worm and a wind, smothering desert wind. Here, God's reminding Jonah what it's like to be lost, helpless, hopeless, miserable. He's not having compassion on people. I guess the lesson for us is to be compassionate as we deal with people in ministry. Not just to get the job done, but show true compassion. While Jonah's inside the fish, he prayed to be delivered. Now he's asking God to kill him. Make your mind up, buddy.
Drama.
That's a hard problem. In verses 9 through 11, God instructs Jonah. He's still speaking to him. And God said to Jonah, do you have a good reason to be angry about the plans? You have good reason even to death. Man, I wouldn't answer God that way. But here's unrighteous anger feeding his ego. Produces poison, selfishness in his heart. Still had a problem with the will of God at this point. Still going against God's will. He had another lesson to learn here. Probably the best lesson. On chapter 1, he learned the lesson about God's providence and patience dealing with him. In chapter 2, he learned a lesson about God's pardon. Okay? God forgives those who call on him. Jonah called from the belly of the whale, belly of the fish. God pardoned him, saved him, threw him up on land. Chapter 3, he learns about God's power as he sees the whole city humble themselves. The entire city. And now he has to learn about God's pity on people.
What was the first P?
First one was providence and patience. Number 2 is pardon. God pardoned those who call on him. Okay. God's power in chapter 3 as the whole city repents from a few words that one guy had to say. And now we're going to see the pity. The servants have to have compassion when they're serving. So that's the message for us, that they be compassionate as we serve. Jonah had pity on a vine that died. But he didn't have compassion on the people that could have perished and live eternally away from God. That's a hard heart. A hard heart there. So for us, we need to learn that lesson of pity, to have pity on people who are lost. Compassion for lost souls. That ought to be foremost in our minds. People lost, I want to give them the message. And in Wiersbe suggests there's a marvel of the unanswered question. And it's kind of funny the way the book ends with a question with no answer.
Mm-hmm.
Strange way to end. It ends about God's pity for Nineveh. Now we're not told how Jonah answers this. And God's question is, should I not have compassion on Nineveh? So we don't know the answer to that. Now, wasn't Jonah spared because of God's pity, God's mercy on him? How can you not have compassion for somebody else when it's been given to you? It follows suit with some of the teachings we have about the servant who was forgiven much and didn't forgive the people who owed him money. How can you not in kind. And we read this before, Matthew 12:41. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas, and behold, a greater than Jonas is here. Who's that?
Jesus.
How is Jesus greater than Jonah?
It's God.
Can his name someone away?
The virgin birth. Foretold by the angels. Lived a sinless life.
Who's a visible image of the invisible God. Holy God,
Crucifixion and
Holy Man,
resurrection too.
Okay.
the greatest possible being. He was eternal.
The miracles he performed when he was here.
He was greater in his message than Jonah. Okay, Jonah preached a message of judgment. What does Jesus preach?
Redemption.
Grace, salvation. Okay. Jonah almost died for his sins. Belly of the fish, or on the boat. Okay. But Jesus died for the sins of the world. Okay. Jonah's ministry to one city. Jesus is Savior of the world.
I think it's interesting too how when Jesus was preaching all the time, he would say things like, "No sign will be given except for the sign of Jonah." How he'd
Yeah.
refer back to Jonah.
Yeah, an
too.
evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign.
None will be given.
None will be given except this sign, and that's where we're seeing the sign of Jonah as a type of Christ. Okay.
Hey Joe, I helped Maggie prepare a lesson. I promised her we're going to come watch her.
Thank you, Joe.
We're going to finish up in a few minutes anyway, but go ahead.
Thank
Jonah's
you.
obedience was not from the heart, but Jesus did what pleased the Father. And Jonah didn't love the people he came to save, but Jesus had compassion on sinners